The first light of morning touched the quiet hills of Evershire, a small European countryside that lived by its own rhythm, slow, tender, and honest. Dew rolled off rooftops, and smoke from kitchen chimneys rose like thin gray ribbons into the pale sky. The smell of bread drifted from the bakery near the old church, mixing with the sound of cartwheels against cobblestone. It was a calm that never needed to be announced. That was the day Daniel Hart arrived. A dark sedan rolled to a stop near the town square, and a tall man in his mid-30s stepped out, adjusting his collar against the morning breeze. He wasn't from here, that much was clear from the way people looked at him. His shoes were polished, his voice calm, and his face carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen more of the world than most. Daniel was an engineer, a lead project supervisor for the Ministry of Public Works. He had been sent from the capital to oversee a government-funded bridge project just outside the village. To him, it was just another assignment, another piece of land to measure, another report to sign. But sometimes fate doesn't arrive with a storm. Sometimes it hides inside a quiet morning, waiting. The day stretched into golden afternoon. Daniel walked down a narrow dirt path that led to the river, the site where the new bridge would soon rise. The river wasn't wide, but it ran deep, with cold water that moved like glass beneath the old wooden planks of the temporary crossing. On the other side of the path stood a small fruit stall made from wooden crates and a patchwork of old canvas. It was nothing special, yet something about it drew his eyes. Behind the stall stood a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, arranging oranges into a basket with delicate hands. She had short brown curls tucked behind her ear and a gentle face that seemed untouched by vanity. But what caught his attention wasn't her beauty, it was the way she carried herself. Her right leg dragged slightly behind the other, every step careful but brave. When he greeted her, her voice trembled slightly, caught between politeness and surprise. She offered him a smile so small it almost wasn't there, yet it lingered in his mind long after he walked away. Her name was Mara Ellis. Daniel found himself returning to that riverside stall every few days. Sometimes he said it was to check the bridge alignment, other times to buy fruit he didn't even eat. He talked about work, about the city, about how strange it was to wake up without traffic noise. Mara mostly listened, nodding and smiling shyly. She never talked about herself much. He noticed how she always wore long skirts that brushed the ground, how she stood mostly on her left leg, leaning slightly when she walked. Yet she never complained. When he paid for the oranges, she always returned part of his money, saying he'd taken too few to deserve that much. She didn't realize that it wasn't about the fruit at all. Weeks passed. Daniel's presence became part of her days. Sometimes he came early, bringing coffee from the inn where he stayed. They would sit under the same tree, the air filled with birdsong and the smell of wet soil. Still, Mara kept a wall between them, a polite one, invisible but firm. When he asked where she lived, she laughed softly and changed the subject. When he offered her a ride home on rainy days, she always refused. Daniel didn't press. He only smiled, as if waiting was something he was good at. But curiosity has its own path. One evening, when the sky turned pink and the workers had gone home, Daniel decided to take a walk beyond the main road. He passed the old chapel, then a stretch of broken fences that led to a small row of cottages near the forest edge. That's when he saw her. Mara was walking slowly, a basket balanced on her hip. the limp in her step more visible now that she wasn't pretending to hide it. She stopped at a narrow wooden gate in front of a worn-down cottage, the paint flaking, the roof patched with tin. Inside the yard, an old woman sat on a stool shelling peas, while a younger woman with long blonde hair stood by the door, combing her reflection in a hand mirror. When Daniel waved from the road, Mara froze. The younger woman turned, noticed him, and smiled, in a way that wasn't shy at all. The next day, Daniel returned to the stall as usual. Mara looked uneasy, her hands fidgeting with the basket. He didn't mention what he saw. He simply said, "I found your house by accident. You have a beautiful view of the forest." Her eyes widened, not in delight, but in worry. She said quietly, "You shouldn't have come there." But he only smiled, as if waiting was something he was good at. That afternoon, he showed up at her cottage with a small bag of groceries. Mara's mother, Mrs. Ellis, opened the door, her sharp gaze measuring him from head to toe. Her voice was sweet, but heavy with curiosity. "You must be the gentleman from the city." She nodded politely. Inside, the air smelled of soap and smoke. The old floorboards creaked under his boots. Mara stood by the window, nervous, while her younger sister, Tina, approached with a confident grin. She was beautiful in the way sunlight is bright, obvious, loud, impossible to ignore. Her blonde curls glowed, her dress crisp and stylish. Mrs. Ellis made sure to mention that Tina had many suitors in the next town, that she was planning to move to the city soon. Her tone carried something unspoken, a hope that Daniel would take interest. He listened politely, nodded when needed, but his gaze never shifted from Mara, who stood quietly in the corner, pretending to rearrange a vase that didn't need arranging. When he left that evening, Tina followed him to the door and tried to slip a folded note into his hand. He let it fall to the floor as gently as possible and said, "You dropped this," before walking away. The next few weeks were strange. Mara tried to keep her distance, afraid that his visits were causing trouble at home. Her mother often scolded her after he left, accusing her of wasting a rich man's attention. Tina mocked her limp openly, saying no man could possibly choose her over a real woman. Yet Daniel's visits continued, steady and patient, like rain that refused to stop. Sometimes he brought small things for the boy, Liam, the 8-year-old who called Mara Auntie. Liam adored Daniel instantly. They built small toy bridges together from sticks and stones. Daniel watched how Mara's eyes softened when Liam laughed, how she knelt to fix his shirt even though it hurt her knee. He wondered why the boy seemed more attached to her than to anyone else. One day he asked, "Does Liam's father live nearby?" Mara's mother jumped in too quickly. "Oh, his father is long gone, and this one here, she's just too soft on him. He'll grow up spoiled." Daniel nodded, but something in her tone didn't sit right with him. The bridge construction moved faster than planned. Daniel's days became busier, his evenings longer. Yet he always found time to visit the cottage, to bring bread for Liam and oranges for Mara. One evening, after work, he walked her halfway home. The road was silent, except for the sound of his boots and her careful steps. He stopped near the old oak tree by the bend and said softly, "I know you think I don't see it, but I do. The way people look at you, the things they say." She froze. Her hands tightened around her basket. He continued, "You're stronger than all of them." Mara wanted to say thank you, but her throat wouldn't open. For a moment, she just looked at him, her eyes wet, but steady. That night, her mother asked if Daniel had said anything unusual. She said no. Tina rolled her eyes. He's only being kind. Don't think too much. But deep down, jealousy was growing like weeds between them. A few days later, Daniel came again, this time not to visit, but to speak his truth. He found Mara alone in the garden, fixing a broken fence. The sunlight fell through the trees, scattering golden patches across the grass. He said, "I've been thinking about you, Mara. A lot." Her hands froze. She didn't look up. He took a step closer.
I know you don't think highly of yourself, but I do. I want to be with you. The words fell softly, yet they carried weight. She shook her head, half smiling, like someone trying to hide pain. You don't mean that. I do, he said. I've met enough people to know when I've met someone real. For days, she avoided him. The fear in her heart was louder than her hope. Then came the night when everything changed. The rain poured hard, the kind that floods streets and hides mistakes. Inside the cottage, voices rose and cracked. Mrs. Ellis was shouting, Tina was crying, and Mara stood still as lightning split the sky. Daniel arrived soaked, hearing the noise before he reached the door. Through the shouting, one sentence cut through the storm. Mrs. Ellis screamed, "Fine, if you won't tell him, I will. That boy, Liam, he's not your brother. He's your son." The house went silent except for the rain. Liam, standing near the table, looked up at Mara with confusion. His lip trembled. Mara's heart stopped. Her secret, the one buried deep beneath her quiet strength, had been dragged into the light like something ugly. She whispered, "It's true." Tears fell, one by one, but she didn't run. She only looked at her son and said softly, "I'm sorry." Daniel didn't speak, not that night. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, and left without a word. Mara didn't see him for days. She stopped going to her stall. Her mother didn't apologize, and her sister didn't stop mocking her. Liam didn't understand why his mother cried at night. He slept beside her, holding her hand, whispering that it was okay, even when it wasn't. In the city, Daniel tried to bury himself in work, but every time he looked at the bridge blueprints, he saw her face, brave, wounded, unashamed. He thought of her limp, her quiet endurance, and how the world had treated her unfairly long before he arrived. He realized love isn't about perfection, it's about peace. That was the day he packed his bag and drove back to Evershire. The road was long and heavy with fog, but he knew where it led. The next morning in Evershire was wrapped in mist. The river behind the construction site moved like slow silver beneath the new bridge beams. The workers had already begun their tasks, unaware that Daniel's car was parked quietly by the edge of town. He hadn't slept. The image of Mara standing in that rain-soaked doorway haunted him, her shoulders trembling, her voice small but honest. He thought about every word, every look, every time she'd smiled to hide her pain. When he stepped out of the car, the morning air felt colder than usual. He didn't know what to say to her. He only knew he had to go. Mara was sitting outside her house when he arrived. Her mother stood by the door, arms crossed, eyes sharp like broken glass. Tina lingered behind, pretending to sweep, watching from the corner of her eye. Liam sat quietly on the ground beside Mara, building a small bridge out of sticks and stones, just the way Daniel had shown him. When the car stopped in front of the gate, everyone froze. Daniel stepped out slowly. His coat was plain this time, his shoes covered with mud from the walk.
The rich man they'd once whispered about looked ordinary, like someone who had left something behind and came to collect it, not for show, but for peace. Mara's mother muttered under her breath, "He's come to laugh, I'm sure." Daniel approached without a word. His eyes met Mara's, and that was enough. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the dried tears, the thin lines of sleepless nights. He said softly, "Can we talk?" The mother moved to protest, but Daniel's voice was calm, firm. "Please, ma'am, just a few minutes." Mara rose slowly, her limp showing more than usual after days of silence. She followed him to the same tree where they first met months ago, the one near the stall that no longer stood. They stood in quiet for a long moment before Daniel finally spoke. "I left because I didn't know how to feel, not because I stopped caring," he said. Her eyes lowered. "You know now, though. You know the truth. About Liam. About me." He nodded. "I do. And it changes nothing." She shook her head slowly. "It should. I lied, Daniel. I let you believe something that wasn't real." "You didn't lie," he said. "You survived." The wind rustled through the branches. A single yellow leaf fell between them. He continued, "You made choices out of pain. You didn't hurt anyone, and I won't let your past define you, not when your strength is what drew me here in the first place." Mara tried to reply, but her voice broke. "I don't deserve you." He took a slow breath, stepped closer, and looked at her with the kind of peace she had never seen in anyone before. "You deserve a chance at happiness, with or without me." And then quietly, "But I'd rather it be with me." That evening, Daniel stayed for dinner. It was the first time laughter entered that cottage without someone forcing it. Liam sat beside him, showing him his toy bridge again. His innocence broke every wall left between them. Mara's mother watched in silence, eyes darting between Daniel's smile and the way he treated her daughter. Gently, with respect she'd never known how to give. She realized for the first time that maybe the shame she'd thrown at Mara all her life was never hers to carry. When Daniel left that night, the air inside the house felt lighter. Even Tina, proud, jealous Tina, stayed quiet, as if something inside her had shifted too. Days turned into weeks. The bridge project neared completion. The workers celebrated. The townsfolk gathered, and the river now carried its reflection beneath a graceful arch of steel and stone. Daniel stood on the bridge one afternoon, watching the water flow. He thought about leaving soon, about returning to the city, about the life he'd built, empty in all the right ways until now. He realized something simple. He didn't want to go alone. 1 month later, a small wedding was held at the chapel on the hill. No golden chairs, no royal crowd, just a few locals, a few flowers, and the sound of wind through the stained glass. Mara walked down the aisle wearing a cream-colored dress that fluttered around her uneven steps like waves finding their rhythm. Her limp didn't make her slow. It made her graceful in her own way. Liam walked beside her, holding her hand proudly. Daniel waited at the end of the aisle, his eyes filled not with excitement, but with calm certainty. When the priest asked if he would take her as his wife, he smiled gently and said, "I already have, every day since I met her." Mara's tears fell quietly, not of sadness, but disbelief that she had been chosen fully and without pity. They exchanged vows, simple and honest. No promises of perfection, only of patience. No grand declarations, only truth. After the ceremony, the village children ran through the field throwing petals made of torn paper.
Mara's mother stood back, her eyes glassy. She approached them after everyone had gone and held her daughter's hands for the first time in years. She whispered, "I was wrong. All this time I thought love was for those who look perfect, but you taught me that love is for those who stand back up." Mara smiled faintly. "It's never too late to stand too, Mama." The two embraced, and for the first time there was no bitterness in their silence. Weeks later, Daniel built the new house for the family at the edge of Evershire, small but warm, overlooking the hills. He made sure Mrs. Ellis never struggled again. He gave Tina a chance to study in the city, something she'd always dreamed of, and she accepted it with quiet gratitude instead of envy. But Mara didn't move there. Daniel had promised her something better. Not grand, not loud, but peaceful. The city greeted them with tall buildings and unfamiliar sounds. They moved into a simple townhouse on a quiet street lined with birch trees. Every morning, Daniel left for work, and every evening he came home to the smell of bread and the sound of Liam's laughter filling the hallways. Mara learned to paint again, something she'd given up long ago. Her limp made her slow, but her hands steady. She painted rivers, bridges, and skies that looked like second chances. Sometimes when she stood by the window watching the city lights, she remembered Evershire, the dusty road, the stall under the mango tree, the man who never stopped coming back. Time passed softly. Years began to fold into one another. Liam grew taller, his eyes brighter. He called Daniel Dad without hesitation, and the word sounded right in every way. Mara's mother visited often. The bitterness that once filled her heart had melted into gratitude. Even Tina came sometimes, dressed like the city had taught her new things, though every visit ended with her saying quietly, "You really did win, Mara. Not because of him, but because you believed someone like him could love someone like you." One evening, Daniel returned home late from a site inspection. The city was drenched in soft rain, and his coat was wet when he walked in. Mara was asleep on the couch, a painting half finished beside her, a bridge stretching across fog, two small figures walking towards each other from opposite ends. He smiled, brushed the curl from her face, and whispered, "Still building bridges."
The rain tapped the window like gentle applause. Years later, on their anniversary, they returned to Evershire. The village hadn't changed much. The same cobblestone roads, the same bakery smell, the same church bells echoing through the hills. They visited the bridge first. It still stood strong, polished by time and rain. Daniel placed his hand on the railing, and Mara stood beside him, leaning on her cane. The same confidence in her eyes that had once been fear. He asked softly, "Do you ever think about that first day?" She smiled. "Every time I walk without hiding my limp." He turned to her. "I didn't save you, Mara. You saved me." Her laughter floated through the breeze. "Then I guess we're even." That night they stayed at the old inn. The moon hung above the hills, casting silver light through the window. Daniel lay awake, listening to Mara's steady breathing beside him. He thought of how far they'd come, from a chance meeting at a roadside stall to a life built on quiet love and forgiveness. He realized something true. Not all wounds need to disappear for healing to begin. Some stay as proof that we made it through. At dawn, Mara stood outside, her cane resting on the wooden fence. The sun rose over the fields, painting everything gold. Liam ran ahead toward the bridge, laughing. Daniel joined her, his arm brushing hers. They stood there silently, watching the boy disappear into the light. The world was still imperfect,
Her legs still ached on cold mornings, his work still demanded long hours, but together they had built something unbreakable. And sometimes that was all anyone needed. When they left Evershire for the last time, Mara looked out the car window one final time. The stall was gone. The mango tree still stood. The bridge glimmered under the sun like it knew their story. She whispered quietly, "That's where it all began." Daniel took her hand, "And where it'll always live." The road curved ahead, leading toward the city, toward ordinary days that felt extraordinary only because they had survived the impossible. Years later, when people spoke of Daniel Hart, the engineer who built bridges across rivers and cities, they also spoke of his wife, the quiet woman who limped when she walked but carried strength in her smile. They said she was the kindest woman in Evershire. They said the rich man chose her over 1,000 easier paths. They said love is not blind, it simply sees deeper than the surface. A gray morning, an empty riverbank, an old bridge standing tall, and a painting hanging in their city home. Two figures crossing the same bridge, finally meeting in the middle. Because some bridges aren't made of stone or steel. Some are made of patience and love that refuses to walk away.